Hi, everyone, and welcome to China EVs and More. My co-host and I, Lei Xing, will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the global EV, AV, and mobility sectors. This week seemed to be a very, very important week for the German automakers, so we will get into that later. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. For those that are new to the show, welcome. And to our loyal listeners, welcome back. We ask that you help us get the word out about this podcast to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino Insights, a global management consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.substack.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, a flexible Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Well, good morning to a northwestern to be exact, to this is your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and this is episode number 179. A good day for Neil, a great day for Neil. A massive bet from Mercedes, a rollback from Volvo, a jarring scene out of Wolfsburg, a shocking prediction from William Li, and fresh new records from August NEV sales, and a sub $10,000 Volkswagen Bora, just to add to the fun.
Everybody has been talking about the Volkswagen announcement that has put plant closures in Germany on the table from a restructuring standpoint. And there have been protests now in Germany from the unions. There are headlines that says Volkswagen's in crisis and this is a bankruptcy proceeding. So maybe we start with that.
Boy, I mean, we were chatting with a good friend, and so all of those, and then you had Arno Antelis, the CFO, posting on LinkedIn. You had Daniela Cavallo posting her thoughts on LinkedIn, and they couldn't be more extreme at the extreme ends.
So who is Danilo Cavallo, Lei?
She is the Works Council, chair or head of the Works Council.
Effectively, she's on the opposite side of the table.
Yeah, and my goodness, it's in the history of Volkswagen Group, no plant has been closed, if I get the facts right.
In Germany.
In Germany. And now that's on the table is why the protest, because these workers are scared for the first time ever I think the board is trying to remove that clause or something that saying that, not considering the closing of plants will no longer be something that's ingrained, right? And you have Cavallo saying that's not going to happen. We're not going to shut plants. And the board saying we have to do it, or at least hinting that they had to do it.
And they're talking 500,000 units of capacity, effectively.
Scary, right? Scary stuff. And then you add Volkswagen Group of any automaker in the world has the most complicated structure. When you talk about the board, the supervisory board, the Lower Saxony, state of Lower Saxony, the prime minister is on the supervisory board. So the board does not make the decisions if they wanted to close plants. And that's the thing that kind of drags them down as a company, the kind of moves that you need to make, and you can't do it.
A couple of things that I'd like to mention. I look at what's going on with Volkswagen and their labor union as a bit of a microcosm and representative of the entire EU. And this has never happened in the history of the automotive space. I'm going to take 10 seconds to pat myself on the back. I have long arms because I'd been talking about this for years. And so this doesn't surprise me at all. And the next thing I'll talk about is how even with Dieselgate, there was no plant closures in Germany. So you would argue just alone on that fact that this is a worse situation than Dieselgate. And 10 years ago, you couldn't have fathomed anything, or 7 years ago, 8 years ago, you couldn't have fathomed anything like that. And so I hope Ford, GM, Stellantis, Toyota, I hope they're taking notes. Now, their situations are a lot different than Volkswagen groups because Volkswagen has a great deal of exposure to China. And so this is
As do the
why
Germans overall. And we'll talk about it.
they do, yes. And this goes back to your point, Lay, that Mercedes and BMW aren't as complicated. So it's a tangled web that needs to be untangled. And then the cherry on top, Lay, is that within the next 24 months, there's likely going to be more Volkswagen branded vehicles shipped to Europe from China. So they're not only going to be shutting down factories in Germany, but if they get their way, they're shipping more Chinese made vehicles to Europe.
And they've already got a concession from the EU Commission, as we talked about. Kind of a
Yeah.
concession. I mean, the costs, I think there are a few articles from Wall Street Journal of German automaking is the highest of, I guess, anywhere in the world because of this corporate kind of the organizational, this labor union structure that it's difficult. I mean, when you want to reduce costs, what kind of levers can you pull?
Well, you can stop buying back your own. You can stop buying back your own shares and giving money to investors.
And I think if I remember the numbers correctly, Volkswagen brand, I think their margin was at 2.3%, the most recent half a quarter, and they want to get to 6%. And one of the ways to do it is those two plants with the 500,000 capacity that need to be shut is one way to do it. But it's unlikely to happen because of, the various interests involved, right? And that's the thing you're kind of stuck in the middle. You can't move ahead, you can't move backwards. You're kind of on neutral, right?
And this is where they're both making these announcements as their initial bids, their kind of offers to each other. Kavala can't look weak in the public sphere, but I don't know. See, I don't know enough about the European unions, German unions in particular, to know, because I know intimately well the UAW because my father was a member, and I'll have a lot of friends whose fathers and mothers were members, and so I've experienced the UAW, the good and the bad. With the German unions, it seems a bit more extreme, and then they have what seems to be law on their side and government on their side. In the United States, they do too, but this is unprecedented.
Yeah. There's got to be a reckoning moment, a step that needs to be taken, a courageous step.
Well, I think this is it, because you and I have been talking about how much overcapacity Volkswagen have because they've lost so much volume in China. And I've written about this number of times in the newsletter. Tough decisions need to be made sooner rather than later. And this feels to me like they kick the can down the road as far as they can. And because a decision like this, if you are looking at, and you and I know a ton of people on their comms team, you and I know that this has been analyzed for months, if not at least a year. So it's not like, oh my God, these numbers are so bad, all of a sudden this happened. This has been calculated. And don't get me wrong, I think their forecast numbers from China were probably a little bit too rosy to begin with. And then when reality came in and the numbers were worse than what they had been forecasting as sales losses and margin losses, revenue losses, that's when they had to pull this, we need plant closures, we need cost savings. Because I bring that point I made earlier up is because I think a couple of years ago, within the last couple of years, they spent 4-5 billion euro to buy back shares. And so that's like 40% of the 10 billion that they need to save or something like that. So,
and now looking back, Dees is kind of scapegoated in a way. I mean, he was driving this cultural change. He was driving, he was being real, but execution wise, it didn't go well. And now I think Volkswagen's facing the same problem that It's been lurking behind them for years. You're correct. And when do you make that move, that hurtful move? It's going to hurt, but taking a step back to go forward.
One of the things that I think Kavala is pointing to is, you know what? It's not the labor. It's not the blue collar people. It's the white collar people that need to get
Yeah,
laid
she's
off.
talking about processes, about the board not doing their job. Yeah. He said, she said, this is a great soap. He said, she said. And what comes out of it is going to take some further time, I think. But there has to come one day that something needs to happen sooner than later. And maybe we compare and contrast. We talk about Mercedes, which is making that you can call it a brave move or going deeper down the rabbit hole by investing that $2 billion with partners.
I don't think they have a choice, Lay.
Exactly. They're too much ingrained into the fabric, into the Chinese auto industry market.
And
Yeah.
they don't want to be caught in no man's land where they're not making investments in China, but they're not gaining anywhere else. And so, and then the politics involved with all these moves, all of these investments gets scrutinized to the nth level because they are losing share in China. So they're doubling down on what a lot of people think are a losing bet, because you and I know there are people that they're out there that are every headline or every post that is the sky is falling, oh, blah blah blah, and so that doesn't help.
Yeah.
Honestly, Lay, if people would have just listened to Chinese EVs and more about 2.5 years ago when we started, 3 years ago when we started this podcast, I think they could have avoided a lot of this heartbreak.
And
so, anyways,
the interest in China, this is reflected through, so the CEOs of Mercedes and Volkswagen Group, they've been to China so far this year multiple times. And that's only one indication of the importance of the market. And second, out of that announcement, the fact that their China team would lead the way into developing the next generation of the GLE SUV not only shows how much important R&D wise China is, but also that segment is to Mercedes.
And you hit the nail on the head, Lay. They go to China because it's an important market, but they also see the future. And the crazy thing about this is that they're getting twisted into a pretzel because Europe is slowing down on EV adoption and increasing hybrid uptake. United States is the same way. And they can't make the change fast enough. And with the politics involved of sourcing Chinese batteries, that complicates things, at least for the European and the US markets. And so if you were only looking at Western headlines, you would see that Volvo is dialing down EV transition, GM, Ford. But then you look over at China, the largest market in the world, let me remind you, and they're at a 50% take rate, which is almost 12 million cars run rate, 10 million cars a run rate. And that run rate is larger than 90% of the markets, 99% of the vehicle markets in the world. Only the United States and Europe as a region is larger.
From a strategic point of view, from a decisive point of view, I think this puts Mercedes in sharp contrast with Volkswagen Group. Both are in fact trying very hard. I'm the one that's usually a bit nicer on them, and making the decision and just make the bet, whatever you want to call it, rather than being indecisive and hesitant. The outcome, nobody knows what'll happen, whether it'll work, but at least.
And it's become clearer and clearer, Lay, that there's going to be a hardware software stack for China. And I'm including cloud, I'm including intelligent driving, hardware, LiDAR, silicon, you name it. And then one for the rest of the world.
The local China R&D team is working on that feverishly,
yes,
as we speak. And it was also, again, interesting to see the mentioning of mapless end-to-end all scenario smart driving. Usually that come with these smart EV startups. Now you're seeing Mercedes talk about these. It's one is that they're trying to catch up. And to catch up, you have to do what the Chinese are doing. So it's a simple game.
Well, and I had sent you that Porsche article where they had that event, the McCann in Macau, and the Porsche owner beaming about his 911 and
I
said
love the
that
911.
no interest in buying a Macan EV because this points back to what you just said about Mercedes. They don't have a differentiator when they go electric. No one cares that it's a Mercedes if it's electric because every other car can go as fast, every other interior. So there's this loss of perceived features that the German automakers they lose because there's no engine, V8 engine or V10 or V12 engine that has been engineered, and invested $500 million in. And so this is that why I believe Mercedes is doubling down on this intelligent driving. They need a differentiator in the China market.
Yeah, and down on the ground, nobody is trying harder than the Volkswagens, the Mercedes in China. Case in point, Volkswagen is trying very hard to work with Horizon Robotics
Yep.
to add features into their upcoming models, autonomous driving features. Mercedes is I think the first foreign premium brand to get the level 4 testing approval. And so I applaud them for trying hard to catch up.
This is where you're kind
I'm
again.
yeah, this is
Because
where
I
I'm
don't
being
believe they
kind.
have
I'm
I
being
don't
a
believe they
stan a
have a
little bit.
choice. Yeah, I don't believe they have a choice.
Exactly. And Tesla is trying to catch up with the FSD purportedly in Q1 2025. They're all playing catch up when they're in the dust.
This epitomizes the whole building the plane when you're flying it because everything is new to them from a process standpoint, from a type of product that they're building to the importance of a market. Germany was always the center of the world traditionally for the European automakers. That's not the case anymore. So because you look at Toyota does really well in the United States. I would argue that Japan is an important market, but the United States is even more important. But everything is led in Germany with the German automakers, and they're losing a lot of control, and they don't know what to do. And this inability to move faster is going to hurt them a lot. But where I want to kind of differentiate, and I think you'd agree with this, Lay, is that Mercedes and BMW a little bit different just because they have fewer brands. And then I would put Stellantis and Volkswagen Group in the same similar buckets because they have 8, 9, 10 brands, but they've also invested heavily into Chinese companies that they both seem to be leaning into. Okay. They want to do more with them, not less.
So if we talk about a type of VW X-Bone, Stellantis lead motor, that makes Mercedes and BMW really the only remaining German automakers out there or European automakers out there that yet to have gone into one of these blockbuster partnerships. And that remains a possibility, I think. But again, the overarching the point that we're making is that this double down, this commitment is not wavering. That's it among all the foreign brand automakers.
So we talked about VW, we talked about Mercedes. You had talked about like 6 or 7 things.
Volvo, that's not surprising also, right? Because it's what has happened with other European automakers rolling back plans, with US automakers rolling back those actually unrealistic plans in the first place, as you pointed out often. Just being more flexible is the politically correct way of saying it.
Yeah, it's wow. It is every foreign automaker is just has
Hey, you know.
Is it the appropriate time, Lay, for me to pull out the panic button?
No, not yet.
not for Volvo, but maybe for Volkswagen.
Yeah, well.
So personally, Lay, I've been looking at upgrading my car, as you know, for the last 18, 20 months. And I'm currently looking at a Polestar 2, a Model Y, and a Lucid Air. So I will let you all know what I decide because the deals on these cars are absolutely
Yeah.
bananas right now
Yeah.
for a 24 model year. So there's 1.99 in Michigan for Model Y purchase. So the lease price doesn't really make a ton of sense, but I'm afraid of buying because residuals
Yeah.
are falling off a cliff. Lucid has really put a lot of money on the hood for their 24 Air. And as you know, the listeners for the last couple of weeks know that I had got a loaner Air, was really impressed. I'll be writing about that specifically. I'm not a car reviewer, but I'll give you my thoughts. So if you want to hear about those, we'll talk about them next week, but I'll also write it in the newsletter. And then the Polestar, you can get it for under $500 lease, zero down, 12,000 miles. In right now, the tough thing, Lay, is getting a 24, finding a 24. So
Yeah, I think a Tesla over here in Massachusetts, I just looked up yesterday. It's under $300 lease with like 3,000, 4,000 down.
yeah, that's bananas.
Yeah, I mean, I'm paying 550 for a loan with a Santa Fe hybrid. So,
But you that tells me you were smart because hybrids now are really harder to find than battery electric vehicles in the
yeah, and
United
the
States and
residual
certain
values
parts of the US.
are better, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, worked out great.
Well, let's talk about August sales.
August
Anything?
sales. So I said fresh new records from August NEV sales. And BYD, I mean, we don't have to talk about BYD. A new record. Leap Motor, interestingly, got to the 30K rate in August. 1 million, I think it was retail sales of NEVs reported by CPCA for the first time ever, and well over 50%. So those were the records. And there are bound to be more records in September because guess what? It's Golden September.
So there can be 50%, more than 50% of annual sales happening in the last couple of in the last 3-4 months of the year, traditionally in China. And we're seeing the Mona, we're seeing the Anvo really ignite. So this time last year, I think the Xiaomi brought excitement to the space, and we're seeing the Mona M03 and the Anvo really inject some excitement into the space. And all three of these cars, what they have in common, they're fairly affordable relative to a Neo or relative to some of these other, like, BYD has the Denza, which is more affordable, but the Yangwang and Fang Chongbao is a little more expensive. And
Yeah.
so I'm super long on the M03. I think that's going to do pretty well. I think the Anvo has some promise. But again, my fear this time around, Lay, is that the Chinese economy is still not completely back on its feet. So pulling in 2025 sales into late 2024, there could be a huge funk
Yeah.
in sales at the beginning of 25.
So a recent, newly updated policy out of quite a few cities, including Beijing and Shanghai, is when you trade in your vehicle for an NEV, you get the 15,000 RMB, versus when you scrap your vehicle and get an NEV, you get the 20,000 RMB. So there's been an update of that rule to drive consumption. And the other lever is just continuous push of these new models, right? The Lincoln Co. Z10 is a Xiaomi SU7 fighter, just launched yesterday in the same similar price range. Zeekr still has the 7X, Jiyue 07, all this month, right? Launching this month to add to the onslaught. And also, Tesla, we dunk on Tesla, but they did pretty well, right? 86,000 in August, total shipment out of Shanghai. I think over 60,000 in China. So,
One thing that's very clear about the Tesla brand is that it's resilient. Now, they're giving out free money, but
which
the brand is resilient.
Worked great. No interest.
People are pointing to the consistency of Tesla sales, but nobody mentions some of the incentives or the price cutting incentives that are in place. I think what's important
Yeah,
is
yeah,
giving a complete picture.
yeah.
I don't believe, and I'm not following the individual brands as closely as you do because my Chinese is not near as good as yours, obviously. But are there any other brands that are offering 0%?
I think it's become an industry standard.
Oh,
The
okay.
double zero. You could either go with a zero down or with a 0%, a zero interest
Okay.
financing. It's pretty common across the board.
Let me ask you a quick question. How's Tesla going to do for the rest of this year? What's your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, like I said, if they maintain at this level with no growth, it's a win. And we've said this many times on the show. We don't expect any major upshot in sales. 80,000, 70,000, 80,000, 90,000. I think I would take that as normal. And it's still for anybody that's selling, that's playing this game, it's the envy. I mean, who does that many in a month? Not many besides BYD. So that shows you the kind of resilience.
Yeah. The one good thing that is happening is that a lot of media coverage is starting to discover some of the really, really complicated issues that are emerging from China being center of the earth. And I don't look at it as EVs. I look at it as automotive. And again, automotive or legacy OEMs are notorious for being conservative. You know that, I know that. And they're going to wring out every single ounce, euro, RMB, dollar of profit they can before they have to disrupt what they're doing. They are professionals at the cash cow and milking that cow. Whereas compare and contrast that to Apple, every year a new iPhone comes out. If that was an automaker, they would sell that iPhone until they saw clear
And yeah,
customers moving away.
and the other point I should mention with respect to Mercedes and BMW specifically, the other thing that's driving their investment is how important they're to the local economy. So BBA in Shenyang and BBAC in Beijing are some of the biggest tax payers for the local economy, if not the biggest.
And Lay, I got to stop you there. I got to stop you there. And that's why it's an asinine statement for somebody to say the foreign automakers are not welcome. They want to get kicked out, or the Chinese government wants to kick them out. It's
Yeah,
complete BS.
well, they will only kick themselves out. Yeah,
Well, and this is the challenge because the foreign automakers, they're the ones that are paying the tax. So it's a double-edged sword now because they have to be there because they support the local economies better than a lot of the SOEs. And then even if the central government, meaning the Chinese government, wanted them out, they've made a deal. That's why Tesla, look at Tesla, like Shanghai government, if they lost Shanghai Giga, oh my God, dude. Like it would be a huge hole in the tax revenues for the Shanghai government. Huge hole.
just look at the financial statements of, let's say, a Brilliance BMW partner, BAIC Motor Hong Kong listed, Mercedes partner. Where did their profit come from? Then, you know,
So so we talked August sales. You wanted to talk Neo.
yeah. And one more point I just tweeted about BYD catching up to SAIC Motor of Chinese automaker group sales in China. They're
And I think you and I can say that SAIC and BYD are probably the top two
yeah.
Chinese automakers.
So there's likelihood that BYD will be once and for all become the number one of anything, any comparison you make in China this year.
And the fact of the matter is, you and I both talked to Ed from
Yeah,
Financial
also
Times.
that the charts that he showed of the flip of the switch, right? Kind of.
Yeah, between Wang Chuanfu and Stella Li, foot is on the gas. I think Wang Chuanfu's foot is on the gas, and Stella's foot is on his foot, pushing harder on the gas.
Yeah.
But the thing I mentioned to Ed, and I haven't read the article yet, but he was alluding to, hey man, this is like they're ahead of everybody, but they're let's remind folks, and it's 7:42 lay where I am, so let's open the room up for questions. You and I will keep on talking for a few minutes about BYD and a couple other things, but please raise your hand if you have any questions or any comments. I'll read some of the comments that have been posted in the space, but they are either in or going to be in India, in Brazil, in Turkey, in Poland, in Hungary, in now Pakistan, Mexico, but they held off, or they're holding off
Yeah.
on hold. So that's 7. What am I missing? Thailand?
I'm
They're in
sure you're
Thailand.
missing a few.
They're in Thailand. So that's 8. But if you look at BYD's current footprint, 90% of their sales, a huge percent of their sales come from the manufacturing in China. If you think about it, there's one currency that they're dealing with on the supply side, not on the revenue side, but on the supply side, from a commodity standpoint and from a logistics standpoint. Now, Pakistan, Thailand, Brazil, Mexico, they all have different currencies. And so different types of labor, different types of culture. So I don't see it as getting easier for BYD just because they've opened up all these factories. I actually think that it's going to slow them down a lot. And there's going to be fits and starts.
When you get to the top, it's harder to stay at the top. And that's the simple way to describe it.
The other thing too, if let's pull it down another layer, because quality is going to be inconsistent. If you're building an Atto 3 in Poland, Mexico, and Thailand, there's just going to be different types of quality, good and bad. And you're going to have to deal with that from a global standpoint. And when you deal in a lot of different currencies, you got to have hedge on the FX rates and all these other things. And so are they up to the challenge? Yes, I believe they are. But I don't see this path to 10 million. Let's say that they're at 10 million or 11 or 12 million. That gets them to number one automaker in the world. Can they do it before 2030? I think that's challenging just because of the number of factories that they still would need to open. And with BYD, it's not just assembly plants, it's battery factories. And so that's a lot of investment. That's a lot of things going right in a lot of countries that they don't have a lot of control in.
So let's talk about the near term first. So this year, they're probably going to get closer to the 4 million. Then they're going to get closer to the 3.6 million as they communicated.
Yeah.
Based on the current momentum.
Which tracks to what you and I had said at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
So while this is an important asterisk. So while they're growing by 33%, because they were at 3 million last year, Tesla hopes to be flat sales.
Which is great.
They hope to be flat. So please continue.
No, I mean, we saved the best for last. I guess we should talk about Neil because, like I said, a great day a couple of days ago.
What did he say about the take rate by?
Yeah, that's, in 2 or 3 years, China is going to get to 80%. I hesitate to agree because that's phenomenal. It's hard to fathom, but it's been hard to fathom. I think still a lot of the Western audience, it's been difficult for them to wrap their head around the fact that it's already at 50% monthly take rate. So I think maybe he need to clear it up. Does he mean annual take rate get to 80% in 2 or 3 years, or is he saying it might get to 80% in a certain month? The latter scenario, I do think that's possible. But annually, 80%, my goodness, I really can't imagine. I can't.
You know what's funny is that the foreign legacies are scrambling now to see where they fit into that higher take rate.
Exactly. SAIC Motors sold 600,000 plus NEVs out of the 2.3 million in the first 8 months of the year. All of the rest are the traditional ICE EVs. GM lost a humongous portion.
So there's 2 things going on with GM that we should talk about really quickly. lost a huge portion of sales, almost 2 million units. And then the sales that they're reporting, a huge portion of that is the Wuling Hongguan Mini EV, or very, very inexpensive Baojuns. So it's a double whammy for GM for sure.
Yeah, and we now we get to Neo. You know, I let's be a Neo stand for a day. Their stock price performance yesterday, I think, was one of the better ones in recent memory, and probably their retail investors were had their one of the happiest days in recent memory. Stock was up 15%. And all comes to think of it is it's pretty a simple business. When you show the kind of the margin improvement, the narrowing of losses, good revenues, good outlooks, you'll be rewarded. And they have. And for the longest time, you know, I talked about Xpeng taking 10 years to get to a blockbuster model. For Neo, it's taken them 10 years to get to this consistency that we talked about. September is going to probably be the fifth month in a row they'll get to 20,000 units. So there's doesn't, and for the longest time that all we have to say is positive because things are looking up finally.
Yes, they're looking up. The one thing that I think is really importantly is the fact that in this time last year there was only U.S. tariffs. Now there are European tariffs, and so that's the second and third largest markets in the world. Up until these announcements on tariffs, Chinese EV makers, Chinese battery makers were increasing capacity in China. Now the Chinese battery makers, I was told, were told to limit investment in more capacity in China, which presses them to build in other parts of the world, a la Ford CATL in Michigan. And so with Neo in particular, I'll give you a scenario. Their premium vehicles, there's just not going to be as much volume just because they're premium vehicles. But the Envo, a winning strategy might be we sell a lot of Envos in China because it's less expensive and we can drive volume, and then maybe ship them to Southeast Asia eventually, ship them to Latin America eventually. But let's primarily worry about our capacity utilization where China takes up most of that. And then the bonus is the Neo stuff because that's going to be the more higher margin stuff. But some of these other automakers, the only company that has a clear path to building abroad is BYD. Some of these other guys are going to have a lot of challenges because not only will they have to spend $1 billion per factory, likely in any country that they go to, they're going to have to market it. They're going to have to create all these networks that support the manufacturing, suppliers and logistics. And so the reality is, I don't see that many Chinese EV makers having the capital or the products good enough to compete against a BYD. There's Neta. Neta's looking at going IPO, but that's only going to raise them $500 million, maybe $1 billion. And so, outside of BYD and a couple of other brands, I don't know which Chinese companies have a clear path to being successful manufacturing abroad, at least in the short term.
Yeah. So management hinted in earnings calls that the F3 is expected to come online by about this time next year. So Neo doesn't have a capacity problem. Li Ben, he said it, right? And Envo and the Firefly are specific. They're more of their global brands. So you'll see more of those.
That creates a crowded market in Southeast Asia. That creates a crowded market in
Europe.
Yep.
Right. The Firefly, in fact, is probably specifically destined for Europe, and they'll eat up that 21% tariff.
And this is where Neo via Envo and Firefly have an advantage over SAIC and MG because of the tariff rate.
Yeah. And also they revealed that their price coverage will go from 140,000 RMB to, was it 700,000 RMB or 800,000 RMB, 700,000 RMB. And with BAAS, it goes down to 100,000 RMB. So you kind of get an idea of where Firefly slots, and they're starting deliveries next year. By this time next year, 3 brands will be selling from
But
NIO.
I love Li Bin, but convincing Europeans and non-Chinese that swapping is a thing, first of all, that's going to be, from an investment standpoint, really, really challenging. And then that's introducing a new technology upon a new technology. So, or new technology upon a new brand. So there's two things that Li Bin needs to be able to market to Europeans really, really well. Not only that, this new Envo brand, this new Firefly brand are significant brands that are going to be around, that build, design, and engineer great products. But, you know, it's not just plugging in, you can swap. And so his level of complexity is much higher than a BYD's. So
Yeah. And then the other thing I'll just add is it feels special for what NIO has performed, have done over the recent months, given the bloodiest of the bloodbaths happening at the same time. So it's incredible that they've been able to get to that consistency that we talked about and showing the improvement financially.
showing improvement,
Yeah.
consistency. I'll wait until the end of 2024 before I actually declare that they've
Yeah.
been pretty consistent. So,
But I mean, the next quarter is going to be better than this quarter. So that's the kind of thing that we're seeing. And Li Hong said 220,000 units. So shouldn't be a problem. Doesn't look like there's any issues.
and if you think about it, 220,000 units is still pretty tiny relative to a 25 million unit market in China and a 70 million unit in the rest of the world. So,
But at the price point they play,
yeah,
I mean, right, 40% of the BV market above 300,000 RMB, right? It's which perspective you look at it.
and then the last thing I'll say before we close it off is Tesla have made an announcement that they're going to be launching, or that they plan to launch FSD in Q1 of 2025.
Yeah, we touched on that. Mm-hmm.
That's not completely up to them, but
Well, the fine print pending regulatory approval.
yeah. So Peter Liu wrote, "A change of time, legacy industry becoming a high-tech industry. No one can be number one for more than 10, 15 years. Someone from nowhere becomes number one." Yeah, I think BYD is going to be number one with a bullet. Tesla is kind of flailing a bit. They were number one for quite some time. And so I'm looking forward to see how, if Lucid and Rivian can kind of cross that chasm, to see how they end up doing with their more affordable EVs in the coming years. Trouble ahead. Our friend Jeffrey, Neo San Francisco, writes, "Trouble ahead, trouble behind with China EV and company on my mind." And then he also writes, "Benz could find themselves in the rearview mirror in China quicker than a fish going into a walk over here in Asia."
Oh my goodness.
I love his
Yeah.
And then for my Vancouver, Canada folks, I am going to be I don't speak today, but I'll be on a panel on Sunday for the Everything Electric conference, the fully charged conference here in Vancouver. So
Awesome.
if you're around, DM me on Twitter and maybe we'll find some time to meet up.
Yeah, you get to check out some of the latest and the greatest. I think Rivian is showing the R3. Check that out.
I hope I can get. Yeah, I probably won't be able to get into it, but yeah. Anyways, so that's all I have, Lei.
Same here.
Hey everyone, thanks again as always for your flexibility, because we started an hour later than normal, and we will talk with you all next week, hopefully on video.
Well, next week we'll figure out a time, because I'll be in Germany again for a week.
Okay.
For an event. I might stay a little bit longer in Munich next weekend. But anyhow, we got to figure out a time because of the time difference.
Right on.
See how that goes. And then,
all right, everyone. Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We'll talk with you all later.
Yeah, have fun in Vancouver. Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at LeiXing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.